IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Thursday is the day. August 22nd is the date, and we are 9 days away from Notre Dame kicking off the 2024 season. Tomorrow, we're going to have a mailbag. Monday kicks off game week. So we're going to dive into the Notre Dame-Texas A&M matchup. So this is technically the last show of the offseason. This is the last show where we're going to talk about expectations and the team and what we think will happen, what we're happy about, what we're concerned about. All that different stuff is going to be on the topic or on the topic of conversation today. Gonna find out soon enough, right? I mean, we're gonna find out who this team is. Step one is next Saturday at Texas A&M. That's a very important game. Is it an end-all be-all game? It is not, meaning if they lose, the season's not over. If they win by 30, it doesn't mean they're going to win a championship, right? It's just it's a step in the process, but it is our first chance to learn something about this Notre Dame football team. It's our first real chance to see what this team actually looks like. I know we've seen some snippets in practice, not really a whole lot. The only full practice we got all of fall camp was a non-padded practice on day one. So in a lot of ways, I know what I've heard. I know what I've seen. I know how I've evaluated this team based on the past, based on the spring, based on, the talent we think they have. But there's a lot more uncertainty on my end of what I actually know about this team compared to past seasons. And it's going to be interesting. And part of it is, there's the aspect of a lot of my sources are just, they don't want to let a lot out there because they don't want a lot getting to Texas A&M. Totally understand that. But at the same time, when I talk to people, there's a lot of excitement on that end of things. A lot of people think this team is going to has a chance to be really, really special. We'll find out if they are or not. But what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of talk a little bit about, well, I don't say talk about, we're going to put a bow on the off season. Right. For us, the offseason ends this weekend, and next week we kind of kick off game week. So we're going to talk about some things. It's I wouldn't say it's repetitive, but it's kind of summarizing everything, bringing it together in just our last chance. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to talk a little bit about Marcus Freeman in year 3. I'm going to talk about the offense. And yes, we know it's time to step up. What am I confident about? What am I concerned about? The defense, can it be even better? Can it at least, at the very least, hold steady with where it was last season, or will they take a step back? I'm going to talk about reasons I'm concerned and reasons I'm excited and think this defense can be better. And then at the end, I'm going to reiterate what my prediction is for the season, let you guys know sort of how my opinion has changed, evolved, and where it lands here as we get ready to kick off the season. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. If you have any super chats, anything you want to get up, if anything, no mailbags, if there's anything you want to get said or read or stated in the show, that got the super chat option. Otherwise, if you want to talk about some things further, there's always the message board. So you can always go to boards.irishbreakdown.com and we will discuss anything you want to talk about. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole last night and was looking at the 1988 team, and somebody had asked a question about the 1988 offensive line. And so then I tried to do some research to find the answer to that. And just thinking about, like, man, could you imagine if we had message boards and the internet and things like that back in 1988, the absolute disaster that those boards would be, with Notre Dame going into the season with 5 new starting offensive linemen, including a guy that moved from tight end the year before. It would have been a train wreck of an offseason, but worked out pretty well for that team. So got into that a little bit of some of the similarities between the 88 team and this team. They don't mean anything, but it was just fun. It was a fun thought experiment. Notre Dame in 1988 had a really dynamic run throw quarterback whose accuracy was questioned by people. They had a very deep and talented backfield. They had a pretty fast receiving core. Offensive line was a major question mark. Had a talented tight end room. D-line was ended up being pretty good. I don't know that it was expected to be pretty good going into the season because you had lost some players, veteran linebackers in the middle, very talented secondary. Pat Terrell was an NFL player, and Todd Light was an NFL player, and Stan Smagala was really athletic. 3 or 4 of your backups were guys that spent time in the NFL. So there's just a lot of head coach going into year 3. And you look at the 87 team and you compare it to the 2023 Notre Dame team, and you look at that 87 team really showed promise, but they also had some really bad losses. I mean, that team kicked the season off with a 26-7 win over number 9 Michigan, beat number 17 Michigan State 31-8, blew out Purdue, blew out Air Force, beat USC by 11, blew out Navy, blew out number 10 Alabama 37-6. Beat Boston College, and then they lost on the road to a Pitt team that wasn't very good. Then they lost on the road to a Penn State team that wasn't very good. Reminds me a lot of the Clemson lost last year. You went on the road and lost a Penn State team that was 8-4 and was coming off of a 10-0 loss to Pitt, a Penn State team that lost to Alabama by 11 earlier that year, a team that Notre Dame had just beat 37-6. And then, of course, Notre Dame goes out and gets beat by that Penn State team, and then, of course, ends the season with 3 straight losses. And of course, that's one thing that's a little bit different. So there was this thing of like, yeah, they showed promise, but there was these disappointing losses. And of course, they go into year 3, and Lou Holtz wins a national championship. So there's also a lot of things that are very different. Lou Holtz was a veteran coach. He had been at other places before. Marcus Freeman is not. And of course, different systems and all that. So it doesn't mean a whole lot other than to say, like, look, there are some things that make you say, like, yeah, there's concerns about this football team, but there's always concerns about football teams. And we're going to find out what this team is made of here very, very soon. And that's what I'm excited about. And that's what I'm looking forward to is we've talked all summer, all off season about what this team could or couldn't be. And we're getting to the point now where we're getting close to being able to find out what it actually is. And that's what I'm excited about. So let's kick things off a little bit with a discussion about Marcus Freeman in year 3. And this is really going to be a fascinating thing because we've talked a lot about the year 3 expectations and what we want to see and a lot of those different things this offseason. We all know about the history of year 3 and we all know about, Newt Rockne was a co-champion, I guess, in his second and third year. Frank Leahy won a title in his third year. Eric Parsegian won a title in his third year. Dan Devine won a title in his third year. Lou Holtz won a title in his third year. Brian Kelly played for the title in his third year. So what is Notre Dame going to do in its third year? And then also a lot of the coaches that failed, you kind of started to see by year 3, you kind of had an idea that wasn't the guy, right? I mean, Charlie Weiss looked pretty good his first 2 years. Year 3, you were like, yep, this isn't it. This isn't the answer. So, what is it going to be for year 3 for Marcus Freeman? Who is he going to be as a football coach? And what is this team going to be? Because at the end of the day, talent matters. Of course, talent matters, but coaching matters a lot too. And can Marcus Freeman show the growth that he needs to show as the head coach to make sure this team is led in the right direction? And that's ultimately where things start. And that's one of the things I'm excited about seeing from this team. But it's also one of the things that look, there's things I feel really good about this football team. But that doesn't mean that they're definitely going to be strengths. There's things that I'm concerned about with this football team. And it doesn't mean that they're going to be weaknesses. We've seen in the past where you go into a season like, I'm a little worried about this position, and it ends up being way better than you think it's going to be. Or, hey, I think this position is going to be a strength, and then it ends up not being as good as you think it's going to be. So those are all things that you find out, but we can only talk about right now what we know and what we think. And so although I'm optimistic that Marcus Freeman's the guy to get this turned around, this is the season that's going to really give us the most concrete evidence of whether he is building things in the right direction, or maybe it's a little bit of a concern, and maybe he may not be that guy. And he's going to have to then go out in year 4 and show us that he is that guy. So what are the things that we need to see from a growth standpoint from Marcus Freeman this season in year 3? Well, I think the first couple are obvious, and that is number 1, week-to-week consistency. And well, I'll talk about the first 2 together because I do think they kind of go together. Week-to-week consistency and road preparation. Can he get this team playing the way it needs to on the road consistently? And fans will say this: Notre Dame doesn't play well on the road under Marcus Freeman. Not true. Well, okay, but he doesn't play well on the road against good teams. Also not true. If you're going to say it definitively that that's the only case, there have been some road games against very good teams where Notre Dame has dominated. They went on the road and played a 9-win North Carolina team that had Drake May, the number 3 overall draft pick in this last year's draft, had a lot of talent, a lot of athleticism. Josh Downs was on that team. Team ended up playing for the ACC title, lost to Clemson in the ACC championship. That team also that year lost to Oregon by just a point in a very close game. Notre Dame went on the road and dominated them that season. The final was 45 to, I believe it was 45 to 32, but it was like 42 to 17. They scored a couple garbage touchdowns late. Audric Estime fumbles the ball at the goal line as Notre Dame is about to hang a 50 spot on them late in the second half. And they dominated that game. They went on the road the next week against BYU. 2 weeks later, on the road, neutral field against BYU, away from home. Had a very strong performance to win that game. Went on the road that year to play Syracuse. Syracuse was ranked at the time and dominated Syracuse on the road. And of course, last season, Notre Dame goes on the road and plays NC State, who spent a good chunk of the season ranked in the top 25. They're a preseason top 25 team this year. Notre Dame beat them by 3 touchdowns. And so there have been performances where Notre Dame has gone on the road against good teams and earned wins. They did not play great against Duke, but they still got the win. That was against a ranked Duke team. Now, of course, the counter to that is they've also had bad performances on the road. And I would actually throw in the good performances. I would say you could kind of put Ohio State 2022 into both, because I thought they were prepared for that game. They played hard in that game. They just didn't execute very well in that game, and I would say got beat by the better team. But there is the USC on the road in 2022 where they didn't play well. There is the road game at Navy where they didn't play very well. They got a win, but they didn't necessarily play very well. Last season, they got a win over Duke, but they didn't play very well. They didn't play very well against Louisville, got smacked in the mouth. And then they went on the road against a solid Clemson team that was depleted with injuries and didn't play very well and got beat by a team they had no business getting beat by. They did have a road loss at USC in 2022, but that's sort of one of those, okay, they were banged up and played hard and they were ready for that game. They didn't have the tools to win that game, and they didn't have the horses to win that game with a lot of the guys that they were missing. But they at least played hard and played well. So there have been good performances, have been bad performances. Same thing at home. There have been some brilliant home performances at home, but there's been some bad home performances. They had no business losing to Ohio State last year the way that they did. They had no business losing to Stanford the way that they did in 2022, or Marshall in 2022. So you get into these situations where sometimes this Notre Dame football team looks like they can play with anybody. And we've seen them at home and on the road just dominate good teams. You know, you think about what they did to Clemson a couple years ago. It was a 10-win Clemson team that won the ACC championship. And Notre Dame dominated them on that day. You know, ran the ball down their throat, completely locked down their defense, dominated them on special teams. They were more physical. They were more athletic. I mean, they were clearly a better football team. That same team a year later at their place, Notre Dame, I don't say they laid an egg, but they weren't the same team that they had been the previous year. And so you get into those things and you say, okay, can Coach Freeman learn from those mistakes? Does he know the plan that's needed? Can he push the right buttons to get this team to play with greater week to week consistency without losing the high level? And that was the issue with Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly did a very good job his last 4 or 5 years at Notre Dame of the consistency. I'll say 4 years, because we saw some weird up and down inconsistency in 2017, especially late in the year. But 18, 19, 2020, and 2021, there was a level of consistency from a results standpoint. They beat all the teams they were supposed to beat. They lost to, 2 games in 2020 and 2019. You only lost 1 in 2018 to a team that was better than you. You only lost 2 games in 2022, all in the postseason, to teams that were perceived to be better than you. And then, of course, 2021, you lost to a playoff team. So, if you think about it, so in 18, 19, and 20 and 21, they lost 6 games. In 2020, there were 2 playoff teams, and in 2018, you lost in the playoff. In 2021, you lost to a playoff team, and then in 2019, you lost to Georgia and Michigan. Georgia was not a playoff team that year, but Georgia was a playoff team 2 years before. They were about on the verge of winning a championship. Michigan lost to good football teams. There was a level of consistency from result. The problem with Brian Kelly's team is they were just kind of always here. They would never go down here. They never were up here. They were just always kind of here. And while that resulted in good records, you never felt like that team was capable of going and playing the best teams and winning those games. They could never get up here when they needed to get up here. And that's what that's what Marcus Freeman's going to have to learn how to do is you need to be able to stay here, but then go up here when needed. And that's what we're going to find out if Coach Freeman can do, because sometimes they go up here when needed, but sometimes they stay here or go down here when needed. And that's something that we're going to have to learn from him is what did he learn from those issues? Because we know he's not happy about it. I mean, we've talked about this a million times. Anyone that watched Marcus Freeman in the last 3 games of the year knows that he was not happy about last season. And not only that, I've talked to several sources. You guys know who I talked to. And they were not happy about how last season went. There was no, well, hey, we made growth. We showed progress. We were a game better than we were the year before. Well, we almost did this. We were a play away from beating Ohio State. We were none of that. It was not acceptable. That was the mantra I got all year, all off season from my sources. Not acceptable, not okay. We've got to do better. Well, that's great. So there's no excuse making. That's wonderful to hear. But it's one thing to know what you need to do, and it's another thing to be able to push the right buttons to do it. And that's what we're going to learn about Coach Freeman this season is, okay, we know he knows last year wasn't good enough. We know that he wants to be better. We know the standard he has set for this program, but does he know the buttons to push to ultimately get them there? This season's going to tell us a lot of that. And I'm not saying he does or doesn't. I believe he does, but I'm saying this is what we need to see from Coach Freeman as we get into the 2024 season. Here's a couple other things that I want to really one other thing that I want to see from Coach Freeman is he's done a pretty decent job of recognizing some of the problems that they've had and addressing them eventually. However, one of my concerns about Coach has been, and this is a somewhat understandable when you consider his lack of experience the last 2 years, but it needs to get better now in year 3, is he would recognize that there was maybe problems in certain rooms or issues between certain coaches and players, but it was oftentimes a little too late to address it from a standpoint of you're able to fix it in season before it cost you games. And, we saw that at some position groups in 2022 where it didn't really get fixed till the offseason. We saw it last year with the receiving corps, and it didn't really get discovered until later in the year and didn't get fixed until the offseason. And those are things that he's going to have to be a little bit more on top of those type of things. Now, one thing that helps him is that he has surrounded himself with people that there's a little bit more buy-in to him. The staff is now more of his guys. And what I mean by his guys, I just don't mean people that he hired. I mean people that know him, that have a relationship with him from the past, that have a vested interest in his success, and ascension. So you have Mike Denbrock now there. They coach together at Cincinnati. They're friends. I believe they share the same agent. He brings in Mike Brown, someone that he worked with in the past. There's value there. Mike Brown took a demotion from a role standpoint. He was the receivers coach and assistant head coach at Wisconsin. He's just the receivers coach at Notre Dame. There's a buy-in there. We know that Coach McCullough's got buy-in there. Gino Guidugli, someone that he's close with, that he worked with at Cincinnati. There's a buy-in there. Al Washington is someone he had worked with before. They've now been together 3 years. There's buy-in there. Al Golden is now somebody they've spent 3 years with. And the things I've heard about how their relationship has evolved the last couple of years as Marcus Freeman learned how to transition from being the D coordinator to being the head coach to where, hey, I'm going to always have my finger on the defense, but I need to have the trust to let Coach Golden kind of do it the way he wants to do it. And then, of course, Mike Mickens is someone he's known since high school. So there's a lot more. Oh, and Marty Biaggi, the special teams coach, someone that he worked with at Purdue. So there's a lot more buy-in. There's a lot more people that understand who he is and what he wants. And the hope is that having that type of staff allows there to be better communication and to be on top of things that go wrong. And I think he knows the team better now. And the hope is that there's better leadership in place to when those things are a problem, that guys will go to Coach Freeman and address it. There's some off the field things that have never been brought to light that I've looked back and said, boy, I wish he would have learned about that sooner. And some of the stuff, like, I don't know if he still knows about it to the degree that it's happening. Those are all parts of a football program that you have to be on top of as a football coach. And so that's something that I want to see growth from Coach Freeman in year 3. And I think that they will. That's all part of the evolution process for a young coach. And I think those are aspects where I do believe he'll learn. I believe he has put things in place to address a lot of those things. Now we just need to see it kind of shake out. And that's going to be the next step. So those are the things that when you talk about growth for Marcus Freeman that you want to see. So when you look at this football team, the next question is, okay, what are the greatest strengths for this football team? What are the reasons that I'm most confident that this team can live up to expectations, can be a playoff team, and can make a run in the playoff, right? Because at the end of the day, that's really where this comes down to, right? That's the standard. The standard isn't, okay, can they go 10-2? That's not the standard. That could happen, but that's not the standard. The standard is, can they make the playoff and then do something in the playoff? And I will say this, I mean, just seeing the most recent super chat, it's amazing the negativity that I'm seeing in the fan base right now. And it's not all or most, but it's there. And as we get closer to the season, it's there. I'll tell you, the coaching staff is the complete opposite. That's one of the things that I believe in right now with this football team is this is a very confident football team, a very confident coaching staff. They have a lot of faith in the talent on this team because it is a talented team. It is a deep team. This is a team that has the most let's see, overall speed and length that we've seen in a long time. I mean, the last time I saw a team that had this kind of overall team speed was 2015. And with this team, there's a lot more depth on this football team. And those are all things you need. You can't just be, we got 11 starters that are good players. It's, do you bring guys off the bench that have the same type of talent of the group that you're putting on the field? Maybe they're younger, maybe they're smaller, maybe they're different, maybe they don't have as much experience, but can they be impact talents? And those are the things that we kind of get into. But I know that the fan base is kind of panicking, right? Some in the fan base are panicking right now, and I'll give you an example. I'll bring up the super chat that just got put by Iden Benami, one of my favorite posters. But Iden, any chance you see us getting beat by 10 plus in a blowout? Like, why is that even a question? Like what is going on in the psyche of the Notre Dame fan to even be thinking that this team could get blown out? Right? Like, I watch these Texas A&M shows and they're all like, we're going to kill Notre Dame. But yet Notre Dame's fan base is kind of shaking in their boots because they got to play a good team in the opener. And where you're asking, is there any chance they could get beaten, blown out by 10? Well, I mean, there's always that chance. Who thought that Ohio State was going to get beat by Purdue by like 30 in 2018? Who had on their bingo card Iowa's going to beat Ohio State by 31 in 2017? Right? I mean, of course those things can happen, but why is that even in our conversation right now? It's because that's just kind of where the Notre Dame psyche is. It's like, and, you know, part of me wonders, I'm starting to think that with some of you, it kind of gets to the point where maybe deep down you are excited about this team, but you're afraid to get too excited about this team because you've been down this road before. So now you've got to convince yourself to be upset about something. I have no idea. But I know this with this coaching staff and this team, they're very confident. Thank goodness that the players and coaches don't have the mentality of the fan base, because there's a lot of confidence on that end, a lot of confidence. Now they know they've got to go prove it. There's no doubt, but there's a lot of confidence, and that's important. Look, confidence it matters. I've said this before. When you go into a game, you have to look at it from this standpoint. There's two teams that are thinking they can win the football game. A lot of times there's the team that thinks they can win. Hey, if we do this, 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 and this, I think we can win this football game. Then there's the team that knows they're going to win. I've talked about this from my experience. There was a lot of games I coached in where that other team would go through pregame and a lot of false enthusiasm because you could tell that they thought they could win, but they were concerned about us. And when the first time we punched them in the mouth or made a big play, you could just see the air come out of their sails, man. You could just see the heads go down. Where when they made plays against us, we're like, no big deal. We got this. Let's go out there and make these plays. And I remember a year I was at Christopher Newport and we're playing Averett College and they've got some kid at half. He's a leading tackle in the league. He's center midfield, running his mouth, chirping at our guys. Our guys are just kind of going through the motions, doing their thing. And it's kind of like, you kind of pissed us off a little bit. And then we came out there and absolutely curb stomped them for 60 minutes, right? Like that was a guy that had to convince himself that they could beat us. And so he was doing all of this because he had to drink some of his own, moral courage to convince himself they could win. And our guys knew we were going to beat those guys. They knew we were going to pound them. And so when you look at where this team is, this is a Notre Dame team that has more of a, we know we're good as opposed to, I think we can be good. That's the difference that I'm hearing from the people that I talk to. Last year was, I think we have a shot to be pretty good. I think, with this guy and with Sam and with this, I think we're going to be pretty good. When I talk to people now, we're good. We are good. It's a completely different mindset. Now, does that continue into the season? That's what we're going to find out, because it's great to have that mindset now. They're confident. They've got a little bit of an edge to them right now. Those are very important ingredients to a championship football team. But a lot of teams have that now. The question that I have is, do you have that when there's 103,000 people screaming and doing these weird chants? Do you have that if you fall behind early in a game against a good team? Do you have that when maybe you're not feeling the greatest mentally or you're fatigued or whatever? Can you maintain that confidence, that edge, that focus that you need to be a champion when you're not at your best? I mean, guys, look, go back and look at champions over the years. I mean, just the last 5 years. Look at Clemson 2018. Look at LSU 2019. Look at Bama 2020. Look at Georgia in 21 and 22. Those teams always have moments where they're not at their best. You guys remember watching Clemson in 2018. You guys remember watching them almost get beat by Syracuse and needing their backup quarterback to come off the bench and kind of rally them to a victory. You remember them almost getting beat by Texas A&M on the road and needing to come back and win and having some mistakes that made that game closer than it should have been. But you know what? Even when they had those moments, they were still the better team and the more confident team. And they knew when the game was on the line, they were going to make the plays to win. They knew that. LSU 2019, they didn't just go kill everybody by 50 points every week. Texas played them for 4 quarters. Auburn played them for 4 quarters. But they just knew, hey, we're the team that's going to make those plays when their backs were against the wall. Can Notre Dame be that team? Can they play a game like Louisville last year where they do come out not feeling great? They're tired. They're fatigued. Are they going to have the same go through the motions attitude they did against Louisville last year? Or does this team have the character to power through it and say, hey, yes, we are tired. Yes, we've had a battle. But you know what? For the next 60 minutes, we're buckling down and we're going to punch this team in the mouth. They didn't do that all the time the last 2 years. Can they do that now? Those are what champions do. Guys, every team has that feeling that Notre Dame had going into Louisville last year. You're just, man, we're tired. We've been punched a lot the last couple weeks. But when you get in those moments, the best teams, that's when they dig down the deepest and say, we really got to lock in. We really got to be focused. That's when an Alohi Gilman is needed as a leader. That is when a Manti is needed as a leader. That is when you need those guys like the Drew Tranquils in 2017. That is when you need those guys. Hey, guys, I know that our backs are against the wall, but we're going to come out in this game and we're going to make them pay for being in front of us. We're going to take out on them whatever we're dealing with, and we're going to go out there and dominate this football team. That's what you need to be. Or, hey, or we're going to come back. We've got this. There's a lot of different ways to look at it, and we're going to find out if this team can do that. And then some of the other things is, like I said, we don't know if we'll see the necessary changes from Marcus Freeman. We'll have to find that out. I'm optimistic we're going to see it, but he needs to see it. And then the final thing for me, and this is kind of true on both sides of the ball, and I'll get into more specifics as we dive into it, but can Notre Dame avoid the bad injuries? Like, that's going to be a major question mark. And obviously they've already been bit by that a little bit with Charles Jagasol going down. That was tough. That was a tough blow to see your, 5-star redshirt freshman who played well in the bowl game, expecting him to be really good, 6'7", 330, all that kind of stuff. See him go down that early in the season, you're just like, man, it's like already. And that can be tough, right? And they lost Jabron Payne in the spring. I mean, they've had some things happen to them already, but so far outside of that, they've avoided the bad injuries, meaning bad injuries can be twofold. One is just your best guys at a position where maybe you don't have the same kind of talent behind him to be successful or to be as good. And then the other one is you have multiple injuries at one position that then turns a strength into a weakness. Those are the things that we're going to look at and find out if this football team can do that. Do they have the talent to have that, mindset to get through those things? Sure. But there gets to a point in time where some injuries, I don't care how talented you are, how tough you are, how focused you are, it's just hard to overcome that. And then, of course, the timing of those things. So, those are all the what I'm looking for things from this Notre Dame team. Those are all the, what are we going to learn and all those type of things. And it's going to tell us who this team is. But I do know this. I do know those are the things we need to see. The question is going to be, what will we see? We know what Marcus Freeman needs to do. I think he knows what he needs to do, but can he push the right buttons? That's the thing that we're going to find out from this football team and see if he's capable of making pressing those right buttons. Before we get to the rest of the show, I did have a couple super chats I wanted to bring up. Got one from Sparkling Swan. Thank you very much for your super chat. First live show I've been able to listen to in months. Glad to have you. Wanted to super chat $16 for the wins Notre Dame is getting this year. I dig that. But here's 20. Go Irish. Appreciate that very, very much. And then Raymond Harton, he's already kind of making predictions for the A&M game. We're not there yet, my man. That's next week, but I dig it. 28-17 Fighting Irish. Book it. I dig it, man. I dig it. So those are super chats before we get started. I'm going to get into the offense and defense here next, folks. But before we do me a solid, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And if you've not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I promise you, you're going to really enjoy the stuff we got planned for the season. So you're going to want to check that out. Again, at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can have a monthly membership for $4.99, an annual membership for $49.99. Or you can join our booster club. We had somebody join the booster club yesterday. They're in the gold club. You join one of those, you get some free IB merch to go with it. So you definitely want to check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Let's talk about the Notre Dame offense. If there's one thing I think we can all agree on, is that for several years, the Notre Dame offense has just not been good enough. Even some of the better Notre Dame offenses have just not been good enough when it matters. And you look at last year's season as a great example. I think Jared Parker did a lot of really good things last season. And you don't accidentally set a school record in scoring, right? Points wise, it's the most points they scored in a season. So I think something like 1908 or 1918, something like that. Scored more points, more games of 40 plus points than any time in school history by 2 or 3 games. That's impressive. Notre Dame learned to do something they hadn't always done under Brian Kelly. You talk about the consistency. Notre Dame would win those games, but they had a lot of ugly losses or ugly wins over teams that weren't very good. When Notre Dame won last year, with the exception of one game, they pretty much destroyed their opponents. And that was fun to see. But at the same time, you don't get evaluated at Notre Dame at the end of the day by what you do against Navy and what you do against a bad Pitt team or a bad Stanford team or a bad Wake Forest team or a depleted Oregon State team in a bowl game or you get evaluated by what you do on the biggest stages. And on a couple of the biggest stages, the offense did what it needed to do. It was helped by the defense in both games. NC State, you had 2 touchdown drives set up by forced turnovers by your defense. USC, obviously, you had your special teams and your defense helped you out. Offense did what they needed to do in those games. And I thought you could go back and argue that the NC State game was one of the better games that Jared Parker called. And especially like responding to the struggles they had early with the crazy blitz packages that NC State was bringing. But they just weren't good enough when it truly matters. And I don't adopt the policy that a lot of Notre Dame fans seem to adopt, that the great loose emoji told me about, which is to Notre Dame fans, the only big game is the one they lose. I don't agree with that, but I do agree with this. You're ultimately evaluated as a player or a coach by what you do when it's in the big games. What do you do when the lights are brightest? What do you do when there's more on the line than just, hey, we're the more talented team. We can kind of roll the ball out and beat this football team, right? I don't care that you pass for 400 yards against Northern Illinois if you don't make the throws you need to make against Texas A&M or Florida State or USC or Louisville. Same with every position. And so when it comes to the offense, there's been some fun teams to watch. There's been some really good players come through here over the years, but it's been a very long time. I would argue since 2005 that Notre Dame had an offense that was capable of saying you can win a championship with that offense. And I'd be curious what you guys think about that statement about 05. I don't know that any of Brian Kelly's offenses were truly championship offenses. You could argue the closest was 2015. But when I think to that 05 team, I've often asked myself, what if that 05 team had the 2012 defense? What if that 05 team had the 2018 defense or the 2023 defense? Like, what would that team – what if Brady Quinn had that type of defense? Now, they had talent on defense, but they weren't coordinated well, and they had some holes and just really weren't good in the big games or the big moments. So it's been a long time since Notre Dame's really had a championship caliber offense, and that's where they need to get to. We don't know if the 2024 offense will be a championship caliber offense. What I do think, however, is that this is the best chance they've had in a long time, even with the issues in the offensive line. And so we're going to kind of look at why I think this offense has a chance to be really good and and what could be the stumbling blocks to this. But the first question to ask that's unique to the offense is this. I talked a little bit about Coach Freeman and what we need to see from him in the first section of today's show. But there's something else that I purposely left out that I need to see from Coach Freeman if this team is going to truly take that next step. It's this. Will he truly turn the offense loose? Now, I believe that he intends to do that. That's why you go out and hire Marcus Freeman. That's why you bring in Riley Leonard. That's why you bring in Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins and Jaden Harrison. That's why you bring those guys in. That's why you recruit Jeremiah Love. I don't think you recruit Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Keedron Young and Aeneas Williams and Cam Williams and guys like that if you're just going to go out there and kind of we want to play ground and pound football and win 20-13 and not make mistakes and not make turnovers and do all. I think if your plan is to be that, you don't recruit the way that Notre Dame is recruited. You don't recruit CJ Carr. You don't do those type of things. But recruiting to be that way and actually being that way when games start are two different things. And what I'm not saying is, okay, is he going to let them go out there and throw the ball 60 times a game and try to score 50? That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is being aggressive. What I'm talking about is, will he have the mindset of, hey, always want to focus on protecting the football, but not obsess over it to the point where you limit big play opportunities. And that's always my fear with a defensive head coach is, are you so obsessed and so turnover averse that you really kind of handcuff yourselves? If you're an aggressive offense, you're going to have some turnovers. It's just a part of the game. Doesn't mean bad turnovers or not smart turnovers, or it's just they're going to happen. You can overemphasize not turning the ball over, just like you can underemphasize it. If you underemphasize it, then all of a sudden you're turning the ball over in stupid moments and making bad turnovers and things like that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is, do you do it so much that you sort of have that paralysis by analysis type of thing that I don't want to make that throw because if I turn that thing over, coach is going to be super pissed and we may not throw it the rest of the game. You can't have your offensive players having that mindset. You can't have your offensive coordinator having that mindset. So it's one thing to say, hey, we want to be more aggressive. It's a completely different thing to come out and say, hey, listen, we're going to be aggressive. I'm okay with making mistakes. I'm okay if you throw for a deep shot on 3rd and 1. I'm going to let you go for it on 4th and 1. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to be willing to attack opponents because think about the name offense. Just the very definition means we're attacking. We're going on the offense, right? We are the aggressors. And for far too long, Notre Dame has had way too many teams that sort of allowed the defense to determine who they would be on offense, meaning the opposing defense. Well, they're good here, so we're going to avoid that guy because we don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to do this. We don't want to do that. They're going to do this. We're afraid of turning the ball over. We're afraid of giving them short fields. We're afraid of giving them points. So we're just going to play real conservative and just, try to be smart and put together long drives. And that's fine. You need to be smart. You need to put together long drives, but you also need to be willing to score from 70. And you're not going to have a chance to score from 70 against equal teams if you're not willing to take some chances at times. And sometimes the chances aren't the thing that open up that big play opportunity. You can maybe hit a couple deep shots. Maybe you hit one for a 40-yard gain. You hit another one for 30, and then you miss 2 or 3. But you've shown that team we're gonna come at you. We're gonna throw the ball down the field. So maybe that alters their coverage structure, and that's what you need to hit that screen for a 60-yard touchdown, or that's what you need to get that one extra defender out of the box that allows you to hit up a big play in the run game. And so but you have to be willing to be the aggressor, and not just against Navy, and not just against Tennessee State, not just against Pitt, not just against Stanford, not against Wake Forest, teams that you can make a mistake and still dominate them. What we saw from this team last year is when they were playing inferior opponents, very aggressive football team, shots down the field, 70-yard touchdown here, 70-yard touchdown there, all those type of things. And far too often you'd get into those big games and they wouldn't do it. And I see in the chat, oh, we didn't have the receivers. Bull crap. I'm so tired of that excuse. Go watch the All-22. Go talk to anybody who was at those games. The receivers were getting open deep against Ohio State last year. The receivers had 3 or 4 chances for big plays against Clemson last year, but the quarterback wouldn't pull the trigger, and the plays weren't called enough. Why was the quarterback not willing to pull the trigger? He pulled the trigger on those throws of Wake Forest. Do we really think that Sam Hartman just came to Notre Dame and just kind of cowered and was afraid of this? No, it was the way they ran their offense on a day-to-day basis. They were so afraid of turning the ball over that they were unwilling to take some of those one-on-one chances. That's the problem. Not, they didn't have enough talent at receiver to hit a couple of those big shots. Nonsense. That's a cop-out. That's a cop-out that Notre Dame coaches have used in the past, and that's a cop-out that fans have used in the past. And that was not the case last year, and it's definitely not the case this year. And so I don't want to hear that anymore from people that only watch the games on TV, because it's not it. That's an easy excuse that too many people turn to really protect coaches who are unwilling to be as aggressive in those moments. If you're a team that is going to play ball control, ground and pound offense against Ohio State or Texas A&M, then do it in every game and just perfect that. But don't be this aggressive, throw the ball down the field against teams that you're way better than, and then you're not willing to do that against the best teams on the schedule, right? That's what I want to see differently. That's what I mean by Coach Freeman turning the offense loose. That doesn't mean undisciplined. It doesn't mean taking unnecessary risks. It doesn't mean accepting your quarterback throwing 15 interceptions. But if it means I'm going to throw 8 instead of 6 or 9 instead of 6, but that's going to then open up more and more and more big play opportunities, I can live with that as long as they're not dumb interceptions, right? Like taking a shot on 3rd and 5 from midfield is not something I have a problem with. Ball gets picked off at the 12-yard line because you took a shot. I don't want it to happen. I'm not okay with it, but I can live with it. because you're trying to make something good as opposed to, okay, let's just get the first down. But you're still not in field goal range. Sometimes it's going to work. Sometimes it's not. You have a defense now at Notre Dame that you can take that chance and know your defense is going to have a 3 and out and get you the ball back. You're probably going to start your next drive close to that 50-yard line anyway. That's kind of where I want to be. You may not hit that play all the time. You may throw a pick 1 or 2 times, but you're also going to hit some of those balls. I can promise you this. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I can promise you this. It is impossible to complete deep throws when you don't throw the ball deep. Right? Like, that's the rocket science that I'm giving you guys today. If you don't take those shots down the field, you're not going to hit them. I promise you that. It's the only way you can hit them is to take those shots. Will Coach Freeman loosen up the reins enough to allow Mike Denbrock to be aggressive all the time, not just when they're clearly the better team? That's a huge question for me and something that I want to see. I do understand at times not being that way. Like, I actually think last year there was a justification for not being as aggressive in some of those games, but it wasn't because of the receivers. It was because of the offensive line, because you couldn't be sure if you could kind of have that type of impact up front, or the time to make the impact throwing the ball, where you go into certain games saying, hey, we want to throw the ball down the field. Like, Duke is a perfect example. They came out pretty aggressive early against Duke, throwing the ball down the field. You had the deep seam shot to Mitchell Evans. You had the deep go route to Tobias Merriweather. He didn't catch it, but you took the shot. You loosened Duke up. But the problem was Sam Hartman was getting drilled a lot. And eventually that drilling started to get to him before he could get the ball out. And that's really what stalled the offense. Same thing against Louisville. It's you weren't protecting the quarterback well enough to be able to get the ball out. Same thing happened against Clemson. So those are the things that I believe were much more of a hindrance than what was going on at receiver. And I don't care if they had a converted running. That converted running back was a big play weapon. Again, if you have any access to all 22 like I do, you're going to see there was at least 3. And I actually pointed this out on the message board. I showed you 3 clips where Chris Tyree was open for a big play and the ball just never came out. You've got to be willing to take those chances this year. That starts from the top down. That's not a blame the quarterback. That starts at the very top with the head coach, and then that goes into the OC, and then that bleeds into the assistant coaches, and then down to the players. And those are the things that I want to see more of from this football team. And if Coach Freeman's willing to turn it loose, again, within reason, then I think this team is going to be dangerous, because I do think there's a lot of talent. But that's a mentality thing. And you can't just turn that switch on and off. It's got to be who you are. And I'm optimistic that this is going to be the case, because I don't know why you hire Mike Denbrock if you're just going to put handcuffs on him. I don't understand why you would do that. And that's why I don't think Marcus Freeman is going to do that. And it's one of the reasons I'm really excited about this team. But this show is about what we need to see, whether we think we're going to or not. We need to see it. And we're going to find out soon if he's willing to do that. And by the way, Sam Hartman had no problem reading defenses. Again, I think sometimes that's a coaching thing. He had no problem reading defenses for several years at Wake Forest. It's easy for us to blame Sam Hartman and blame the receivers. But at the end of the day, folks, the problem is way beyond those guys. The problem starts at the top, and that needed to be addressed. And the team, and they weren't there last year. So, but no more excuses on that stuff, right? I mean, if your quarterback can't read a defense, then do a better job teaching him how to read a defense. If your quarterback's not willing to throw the ball down the field, then you got to do things to get him more willing to throw the ball down the field, or find a new quarterback. Those are all parts of this conversation. And that's part of turning it loose. Are you willing to go to the younger quarterback who's going to make more mistakes, but make more plays if your starter's not getting the job done? That's all part of that mindset that Notre Dame has not had on offense for a long time that they need to have. And again, I believe Mike Denbrock being here is going to be a big part of why that starts to change. And now let's get into the reasons I am confident that this offense is going to be really good. And it begins right where I ended that last section. It's the Mike Denbrock hire plus the arrival of Riley Leonard. The transfer portal has been very good to Notre Dame. There's no question about it. A program that struggled to recruit the quarterback position for several years was able to still win a lot of games because they could go to the portal. Well, this year it's a little bit different, because it's a combination of, you landed, in my opinion, the best portal quarterback out there, and you're pairing him with an offensive coordinator that knows exactly how to use that type of player. One of the things I felt bad about for Sam Hartman last year was Sam Hartman thought he was coming to play for Tommy Rees. And I do believe Tommy Rees's offense would have been very good with Sam Hartman. And some of the things that I was told they were going to do with Sam Hartman, to evolve and change the offense before Tommy Rees left were kind of exciting. Well, Riley Leonard's walking into a situation where the offensive coordinator he's going to work with has a decade-long track record of working with quarterbacks just like him and having a great deal of success with quarterbacks like him. You think about he went to the Fiesta Bowl. Mike Denbrock went to the Fiesta Bowl with Malik Zaire and Deshaun Kaiser at quarterback. He went to the College Football Playoff in the Peach Bowl with a guy like Desmond Ridder at quarterback. And then, of course, the last 2 years, Heisman Trophy winner, #1 scoring offense in all of college football, a team that if they had Notre Dame's defense can win a championship. I mean, if you give LSU Notre Dame's defense last year, they don't lose to anybody, I don't think. And so now he's your offensive coordinator. He has a lot of that confidence, that mindset of being aggressive, but not being like I love how Mike Denbrock attacks teams down the field. Love it. But if you look at their stats, they don't throw the ball down the field a ton. So like aggressiveness isn't just dropping back and chucking the ball down the field a million times. Aggressiveness is looking for your chances to hit monster plays and then being efficient with it. So when you look at LSU last year, Jaden Daniels, the starting quarterback there, obviously had a monster season. If you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers, he threw the ball down the field 20 yards or more last season 55 times. Sam Hartman last season threw the ball deep 57 times. Both played 12 games. So Notre Dame took more deep shots than LSU did last year. You look at medium shots, 10 to 19 yards. This is according to Pro Football Focus. Last year, LSU threw the ball 71 times in that range. Notre Dame threw it 68. So LSU last season had 126 attempts beyond 10 yards, and Notre Dame had 125 attempts beyond 10 yards. But here's the difference. LSU did it smart. They game planned for it. They just weren't taking like these one-on-one shots. They schemed it. It was a part of who they were. They were always looking for that shot. And when those shots arose, they were successful with it. Jaden Daniels last year completed 63.6% of his shots beyond 20 yards, and he completed 63.4% of his throws beyond 10 yards. 24 yards per attempt on deep balls, 13.6 yards per attempt on 10 to 19. Look at Notre Dame, on the other hand. Sam Hartman only completed 43.9% of his deep shots and only 51.5% of his 10 to 19 shots, 15.1 yards per attempt on deep compared to 24 for LSU, and then 11.1 on intermediate compared to 13.6 for LSU. 2.5 points on a yards per attempt average is significant. So it's not about throwing the ball 15 times a game down the field, 20-yard shots. It's a mindset of we are always hunting for that big play. Always hunting for that big play. And that doesn't mean you have to just chuck it a bunch of times. As I said, we're going to look for it when it's there. We are taking it and we're going to hit it. That's a mindset, but that's also, it's got to be built into your game plan. Because sometimes Notre Dame would take shots and it's like, it was just designed to kind of go down the field, but it wasn't really where you need to be. But then when you look at Notre Dame last year and some of the bigger games, a lot of those deep shots came against inferior opponents. And that's kind of where you get into sort of the frustration of, okay, yeah, you're aggressive against that team, but why are you not aggressive against the better teams on your schedule? And that's a different conversation for a different day. So I think the Mike Denbrock and the Riley Leonard combination is going to be huge. I think adding a quarterback that can make plays with his legs is very important for this offense. There were things last year that just, when the offensive line wasn't playing well, there's not a lot Sam Hartman could do, and that's not his fault. You knew who he was that way when you signed him. And he had some scrambles here and there, but overall, he was reliant upon the offensive line playing well for him to play well. He was relying on the receivers doing what they needed to do to be able to play well. Riley Leonard's the kind of guy that he's not the same player, but an example I'm going to use. Think about the 2019 season with LSU with Clemson, and think about that Ohio State game. I mean, Ohio State's secondary was just clamping down Justin Ross and T. Higgins. They just couldn't get open. And run game wasn't having a whole lot of success. It just got to the point where Trevor Lawrence was like, I got this. He goes out there, runs for over 100 yards, makes some throws. You're just like, that's just, I mean, that was great defense by Ohio State's corners, but there's just nothing you can do about that throw. He just put the team on his shoulders and said, I got this. Riley Leonard is not Trevor Lawrence. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about sometimes your receivers aren't going to get open. Your O-line's not going to be able to give you the time you need. When that happens, can you still make a play or not? And I believe to be a championship team, you either have to be so much better than everybody else around you, or you need a quarterback that can do that. And Riley Leonard is a quarterback that can do that. He's not a quarterback that I think can do that. He's a quarterback that has shown he can do that. Riley Leonard doesn't have to be great throwing the football for Notre Dame to win games. I mean, you look at last season as a perfect example, and you look at games where if Sam Hartman didn't throw the ball well, Notre Dame's offense was in trouble. That's a lot of pressure to put on any quarterback. That if I don't throw well, our offense doesn't do anything. You know, when you look at the Ohio State game, I mean, he goes 17 to 25, 175 yards, 7.0 yards per attempt. They only score 14 points. Next week, you know, they go 7.4 yards per attempt and 15 to 30, 222 yards. Offense sputters all game. You need some late game heroics, and you had a field goal that was set up by Xavier Watts picking a pass off deep in their territory. Next week against Louisville, he only goes 22 of 38, 57.9%, gets 255 to 54 yards. A lot of that came late, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks. You know, Clemson, he goes 13 of 30 for 146 yards, 2 interceptions. And when he did those things, they had no chance to move the football. None. And then you go over and look at Riley Leonard, and you look at what he did against Clemson. He went 17 of 33 for 51.5% completions and 175 yards. That's all he did against Clemson. That's better than Sam Hartman, who went 13 of 30. But you're talking about a Clemson pass defense that last year ranked 8th in the country in fewest yards allowed, ranked 5th in the country in passer rating, and ranked 4th in the country in lowest yards allowed per attempt, and ranked 4th in the country yards per. They were 4th in completion percentage allowed, and then they were also 4th in yards per attempt at 5.6. Notre Dame was a 5.5. Think about that. How good Notre Dame was. They were 5.5. Clemson was right behind him. Great secondary. Hartman, if he couldn't throw the ball, there's nothing he could do. He had that one nice scramble, but that was really it. They could not consistently move the ball. Then you look at what Riley Leonard did to them. They go 28. They win 28-7. Didn't do a lot throwing the football, but he goes out there and runs for 98 yards and 8 touchdowns. Right? They're trying to put that game away. It's 3rd and 4. They're about at midfield. He breaks 2 tackles and then outruns the defense for a 40-plus yard touchdown to kind of, win that game for him. And you had a guy that could look at the Notre Dame game. I mean, they're shutting down his pass as they did to everybody last year. He couldn't throw against Notre Dame. Nobody could throw against Notre Dame last year. So what does he do? Second half, he goes out there, makes some plays, stiff arm Benjamin Morrison, the worst play of Benjamin Morrison's career, jukes him and then stiff arms his face into the ground and runs for a big play, put that team on his shoulders and said, I got this. And so to me, having a quarterback like that with an offensive coordinator that is bent towards being an aggressive play caller is what you want to see. I mean, we saw this from Mike Denbrock at Notre Dame in 2015. Even with the head coach that kind of tried to tamp that down, you'd still see Denbrock turn it loose. I think of the USC game. First drive, USC gets the ball. They go right down the field. Just right down the field. Touchdown. That had to be demoralizing for Notre Dame. You could see it on the sideline because remember, the year before, USC obliterated Notre Dame, 49-14. It was an embarrassing loss. And Steve Sarkisian called off the dogs in that game. USC could have hung a couple more on Notre Dame if they wanted to. They could have really embarrassed Notre Dame. They didn't. So they come out in 2015, and USC just goes right down the field. Just Cody Kessler, right down the field, touchdown. So what does Notre Dame do on their first play? Backed up at their own 25 after, down in the kick. They go deep over the top for a 75-yard touchdown to Will Fuller and completely change the game. Completely change the game. Because Notre Dame said, hey, this isn't last year. This isn't 2014. We're not that team. We're here to fight. We're here to take it to you. And that aggressiveness, that mindset is really what drove that team that year. And so you put a guy like that with a guy like Riley Leonard, and it gets you kind of excited for it. I think there's another reason I think I'm confident in this team And if they're good, this is a reason why. Mike Denbrock's someone who understands the need to be balanced. Balance doesn't mean 50-50 yards. It doesn't mean 50-50 attempts. It means we have to be good at both of these things. We can't just be a really good running football team. If you ask Marcus Freeman, what does your offense need to be? He's going to say, we got to be good running the football. And period. That's where he stops. When you talk to Mike Denbrock, it's like, look, we got to be able to do all these things. And that's the difference between a defensive head football coach and an offensive-minded football coach. And that's what we need to see. And that's why I say Marcus Freeman's got to allow him to kind of turn it loose a little bit to where teams now have to respect the Notre Dame pass game. And that's something that I think comes from Mike Denbrock being here. That's a reason why I believe this football team has a chance to be really good this year, is because they have the potential to be a very balanced football team, even against the better teams on the schedule. Then you get into the depth. I think this is the deepest Notre Dame offense we've seen in a very, very long time. You know, you lost Blake Fisher, you lost Joe Alt, you lose Charles Jagasaw, and you still have some talented kids ready to battle. Now they're younger, and the problem when you lose that many tackles is you're going to have to go young, but you've got talent. Emil Wagner, very talented player. Anthony Knapp, talented player. Gerby Lambert, talented player. Tosh Baker, didn't pan out the way that I hoped he would. He struggled to put all that weight on, but a veteran player that we saw start in a bowl game where they scored 40 points and had 456 yards of offense, including 236 rushing yards. So there's balance that if you lose this guy, you're okay because this guy can step in. Another reason I'm confident, there's playmakers everywhere. Like there was a conversation going on in the chat that said, I was asking about Mitchell Evans, and people are like, I'm not worried about losing Mitchell Evans. You've got Eli Raridan. Well, my response is like, you want them both. You're better with them both. But the point to that conversation was true that if you do lose Mitchell Evans, which you don't want to do, you're a better football team with Mitchell Evans. He's a very good football player. But if you do, it's not going to end your season like you would have if you'd have lost Michael Mayer 2 years ago. Could you imagine how bad Notre Dame's offense 2 years ago would have been if they'd have lost Michael Mayer? They'd have been cooked. You put Mitchell Evans in there, and you're pretty flipping good with him at tight end. But if you lose him in this instance, you still do have Eli Raridan. You still do have Cooper Flanagan. You Jack Larson and guys like that. You're going to be okay. And it's the same thing at running back. You do not want to lose Jeremiah Love, but if you do, you still have Jadarian Price and Keedron Young and Aeneas Williams. You're going to be okay. And then if you lose Jadarian, you still have Jeremiah Love and Keedron and Aeneas. So it kind of goes like that. You can lose a guy like Jabron Payne and be like, all right, we're good. Same thing at a lot of other spots. And so this is a very deep team. There's a lot of potential playmakers on this team. It's not if this guy doesn't step up, then Notre Dame's screwed. If they go out and Chris Mitchell's not having a good game, their offense isn't, well, we're screwed today. There's loads of playmakers at tight end. You have it at receiver. I mean, there's just a lot of different things that you look at and say, hey, this is kind of where you feel good about where this football team is because they have the depth of talent and they have different types of playmakers. They have guys that can go out there and stretch you down the field. They have guys can make plays as intermediate, move the chain type of guys. They have guys that can do things after the catch. There's a lot of different types of weapons this year. You have guys can make plays as runners. You have guys at receiver and running back. You have guys that can make plays out of the backfield in the passing game. And then, of course, you've got a playmaker quarterback. So loads of playmakers, way more than we've seen in the past. And this is one of the faster Notre Dame teams we've seen in a very long time. Chris Mitchell's a 4-4 guy to me. Jaden Harrison's a 4-4 guy. Cam Williams is a 4-4 guy. He's going to struggle to play. KK Smith's a 4-4 guy. Jeremiah Love's a 4-4 guy. I think Jadarian Price is probably close to being a 4-4 guy. Riley Leonard's a 4-5, 4-6 guy, which is very fast for a 6'4", 220-pound quarterback. And so when you look at it, there's a lot of speed. Now, can that speed translate to production? We're going to find all that out, but it's sure nice to have it. And this team certainly has it when you look at it. Those are all reasons why I'm excited about this Notre Dame offense. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? There's also reasons to say, okay, what is there something that could hold them back? Are there reasons to be kind of concerned about this football team? And when I say concerned, I have no like I somebody said that some national prognosticator said Notre Dame's because of the injury at left tackle is going to go 8-4. I think that's just ridiculous. And I don't know who's if they actually said it. It's just if they did, that's probably not someone you should listen to. I'm not concerned about them going 8-4. I am concerned about whether or not they can be as good as we think they can be. I am concerned about them maybe dipping down to 10-2, worst case 9-3. That's a legitimate concern if things don't go well. Most likely 10-2 is, I think that the worst case scenario, unless it's just a complete disaster. But what could be the reason that they're not able to compete for a championship? What happens if they're not able to go to the playoff and make a run? What would be the reasons that could stand in their way of getting to that? And there's really three, and they're all kind of hypothetical. Two of them are hypothetical. One of them is a legitimate concern where we are right now. And then the first one is actually not offensive line for me. It's actually, what if Riley Leonard goes down? I have two reasons why this is a concern. Number one is I think Riley Leonard absolutely very clearly gives this version of football team, this 2024 football team, their best chance to maximize their potential. I don't believe any of the other talented young quarterbacks are are at the level in their development or preparation that they can put a team on their shoulders and say, hey, let's go win a championship. I don't know that Notre Dame has the team around the quarterback just yet to go out there and win in spite of the quarterback or because the quarterback is young. Love Steve Angeli, but he's a better version of Drew Pine type of guy. He's an Ian Book type of guy where you can win a lot of games with that kid at quarterback, but you're limited. You're not going to beat the best teams with him at quarterback with any kind of consistency, and that's a concern for me. I think eventually Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr can be that, but are they that guy in 2024? I don't know the answer to that question. And the other concern that I have is I don't believe that they actually had a legitimate competition at quarterback for the number 2 spot. I think it was just kind of like it's going to be Steve Angeli. And these two guys are going to get their reps with the threes, and then down the road, they're going to compete. And I think that's a mistake. I believe that's one of the few things that I've seen and heard from in fall camp that has me not happy is that right there. And if Riley Leonard goes down for a long period of time and they're going to play some of their better teams and they think they're just going to, trot out the veteran, I think you've kind of limited your chances of really maximizing your potential as a football team. So that concerns me a little bit. So we'll kind of, that's another reason why I don't think you can afford to lose on Riley Leonard. Just think he gives this team the best chance to win. The next one is that's more of a hypothetical is, look, I just said all these glowing things about the play. I think Jeremiah Love can do this. I think Jadarian Price is going to do that. I think Chris Mitchell is going to do this. I think Jaden Greathouse can do this. I think Bo Collins can do this. But all of those things you're looking at it saying, okay, but that's all projection. And that's accurate. You're correct. That's projection. I think that those guys can do that. What if I'm wrong? What if Notre Dame is wrong in their evaluation of players? What if these guys maybe are great athletes, but not great football players? That could be something that could hurt this Notre Dame football team. I think that is at the bottom of my potential problem issue. I don't think that's the case, but that is kind of one of those things that concerns me about this team because they're going to need those, especially with the third one, which is the more practical one, which is the offensive line. Now, I think what's happening here is there's two errors that are being made by us as fans. Number one is the panic button. Holy moly, the offensive line is going to suck because they might have a freshman at left tackle. They might have a redshirt freshman at left guard, and they're this, and they've only got 12 career starts, and then there's just season screwed. They're going to go 8-4. Okay, that to me that's a way overly dramatic and unnecessarily dramatic. Like let's take a deep breath, put our big boy pants on, and just let's talk football for a second. The other one is that I think is also an error is they're going to be just fine. Next man in, guys. They're kind of down to their third next man at left tackle, right? Like we can kind of be excited about the potential that Anthony App has, but we can also be willing to admit like but this is not the path that we thought we were going to see from Notre Dame. But what's the flip side of that? Well, Anthony Knapp is going to start at left tackle if that happens, because he beat out a fifth-year senior that started in the bowl game. Say, well, man, you've only got 6 career starts on the offensive line. Well, if that's true, it's because Sam Pendleton or Sullivan Absher beat out returning starters. Guys, that's not a bad thing. Yes, you're going to be young and there's going to be some mistakes, but it means the talent was too good not to put on the field. They're going to be okay, but we don't need to jump into Knapp's going to be the next Joe Alt, Sam Pendleton's going to be the next Quentin Nelson, and kind of say, but they're going to be just fine. They're going to still dominate and run for over 200 yards a game against A&M and on Florida State and all these great defense. Okay, that's taking it to the extreme. The truth is somewhere right in the middle. And how does it play from week to week? I'm concerned about this offensive line against some of the better teams. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about how do they play against A&M? How do they play against Louisville? How do they play against Florida State? How do they play against USC? I'm concerned about that. How do they play to a degree against Georgia Tech? It's really the first 4. I don't think they're going to play bad enough that they lose all 4 of those games. That's nonsense to me. We saw the offensive line play like absolute garbage against Duke last year, and they still won the game. That was with Riley Leonard. They're going to have games they play bad, and they're still good enough to win those games. But do they lose 1 of them, 2 of them, 3 of them if the line doesn't play well? That's a legitimate concern. And so what's going to happen is the offensive line will play good in at least 1 or 2 of those games, and I think they'll struggle in a couple others. The question is going to come down to, can they play well enough in the other games to then maintain that growth? And then can they steadily grow throughout the season to where if you do play poorly against A&M and you do play poorly against Louisville, hopefully you can split those 2 games, but by the time you get to Atlanta and then you host Florida State, your offensive line should be pretty good. Those are the things that you need to see from this offensive line, where if they are a problem early, they need to show development. But what if they don't? What if they're just like last year's offensive line, where all year it's up and down. They look great one week and look like hot mess the next week. Those are all questions that we need to have. And if Joe Rudolph is not able to get this offensive line to develop some consistency and just as important, more toughness. I shouldn't say toughness. Toughness, when I say toughness, I'm referring to physicality, not toughness like they're soft kids or they're not, it's more of a demeanor of how they play the game. Some kids are tough, but they're not taught to play tough because of the schemes being implemented or the way that they're being coached. I want to see a coach that goes out there and emphasizes every day, we are going to bully our opponent. That has to be part of what he does. I don't know that it is. And so that's an honest concern for me. It's not even just the youth and all that. But is he going to develop the mindset that you need to really be a great offensive line at Notre Dame? That's a question. And if he doesn't, then that's going to be the reason that Notre Dame doesn't reach its full potential. If he does, if he simply gets them to be physical every week, then they will survive the games where they're not assignment correct the way they need to be. They will survive the games where their tackle gets beat a few too many times by that other team's really good defensive end. They'll survive those type of games and win because they're physical, because they're tough, because they compete. And the reason I say that is because if Mike Denbrock's worth the money he's being paid, he's going to find answers from a protection standpoint, an RPO standpoint, a motion standpoint, a personnel grouping standpoint, a misdirection standpoint, a moving the pocket standpoint, a max pro standpoint. All those things he can do to neutralize to some degree the issues against those really, really good edge players at A&M, Ashton Gillott at Louisville, Marvin Jones, Patrick Payton at Florida State, the kids that they're going to face with some of these better guys that they're going to have. But if that is combined with an offensive line that just does not play physical football, that's how Notre Dame gets beat. That's how they get beat. I can live with a certain level of you're just going to make mistakes. You're going to have some run-throughs. You're going to have some issues here. But if they play hard, if they're physical, if they fight every snap, the talent is good enough up front, and the talent is good enough in the backfield, and the talent's good enough on the perimeter to still win. But if they get their butts kicked in the trenches like they did against Duke, like they did against Louisville, like they did against Clemson, then that's when they're going to lose games. That's the concern. And so we're going to find that out in game one. If they go out there and they play their butts off against A&M and they just make mistakes, they didn't stay on that double team long enough, they didn't get to that second level linebacker, Nick Scourton just threw, on a couple snaps, threw Emil Wagner or threw Anthony Knapp to the ground, that's not good. But if they play hard and they battle and Anthony Knapp gets up off the ground and the very next play, he gets that reach block on an outside zone and Jeremiah Love's out the gate, then, hey, I can live with that play before he got thrown to the ground. That's going to be the key. That's the true question on the offensive line. It's not, are they just going to give up 8 sacks a game because they're too young? That's not going to be the case. As a coach, I can avoid that. I can make sure that doesn't happen. But if I can't count on my guys to be physical every week, if I can't count on my guys to battle every snap, and to compete every snap and to play with some fortitude and some physicality, that's where they're going to get into trouble. That's where they're going to get in trouble. And I don't care whether it's Sam Pendleton starting, Sullivan Abster starting, Rocco Spindler starting, or Pat Coogan starting. I don't care who it is. They got a battle. I don't care if it's Anthony Knapp or Tosh Baker at left tackle, or Gerby Lambert at left tackle, or Emil Wagner at left tackle, or Sullivan Abster at left tackle, or Ty Chan at left tackle. I don't care who it is. I care that whoever's out there competes their butts off and fights every single snap. That remains my biggest question about the offensive line. It's not inexperience. It's not, can they play together? That stuff all comes. That can be gained. If you don't develop the right mindset with your players as an offensive line coach, that's what gets you beat when you have the talent that Notre Dame has. And that's my last big question about the offense. The talent is there. The potential's there. The coaching is there in a lot of spots. This is really going to come down to, in my opinion, and this is a lot of pressure on him, how good of a job does Joe Rudolph do this season? That's going to determine in a lot of ways how good this football team is. If he's the coach, I hope he is, then this is going to be a fun year. And they're going to overcome the issues they have with youth on the offensive line because they don't have a talent problem up front, folks. You guys all understand that, right? Notre Dame's problem in the offensive line is not talent. It's youth. It's inexperience. That's a huge problem. Matter of fact, I'd rather have 5 fifth-year seniors who are just okay talents but know how to do their job than I would to have 5 redshirt freshmen that have never played a snap and are super talented when I'm going to play Texas A&M, right? That's the reality. But if as a coach, if I know that those kids are going to compete their butts off every game, eventually they're not redshirt freshmen with no starts and no snaps under their belt. They're now redshirt freshmen who have 9 starts under their belt, 10 starts under the belt, hundreds of snaps. They're going to get better and better and better as long as they compete, as long as they fight. And that's what we're going to find out. It's not talent. It's a mentality. That's going to determine if Joe Rudolph does his job this year. That right there. So that's going to end the offensive section. We're going to get to the defensive section next, folks, before we get there. Do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate that very, very much. If you have not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I promise you, you're going to love the stuff we got going on there right now, and you're going to love the stuff that we got coming up for you this season, I believe, anyway. Especially if you're a nerd like I am and you like film breakdowns and stat breakdowns and stuff like that. You're definitely going to get that stuff because I'm going to be doing all that stuff this year. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of fun. So you want to check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You know what I need to do? I need to hire somebody that can sell advertising for us. I don't have the time to do that. So that way I can kind of put a little 30-second ad in between the sections or something. So I actually have time to take a break. It's I know that some of my favorite radio people would have these 3-hour shows, but I'm yeah, but they had breaks in the middle and hour breaks that were 7 or 8 minutes long. They go to the bathroom or get a drink. But I appreciate y'all's patience with me as I, take those drinks and things like that. I appreciate that. Final part of the show today is going to be about the defense. And I really think this defense is going to be really good this season. And this is going to take on a little bit of a different tone than the offense did, because with the defense, the question is really not about, it's not initially about will they be good enough. It's kind of like, okay, are they going to just not take a step back? And will they regress? Like, is what we saw in year 2 more of what an Al Golden defense looks like than what we saw in year 1? I think that it is, and I could sit here and make an hour-long case for why that is, but I think we all understand it. The longer you're in a system, the more comfortable you're with it, the better you're going to play. And when you have a defense filled with guys that are all learning the same exact defense new together, you don't have the leadership and the veteran experience in place. Experience doesn't matter as much. It didn't matter that J.D. Bertrand was a 2-year starter, or actually a full-year starter from the year before. It didn't matter that Isaiah Foskey was coming off X number of sacks the year before. It was all new. It was all new to him. And of course, we go into year 2, and it's some of the same players, but you lost Foskey, you lost the Adamiolas, you lost Tariq Bracy, you lost Brandon Joseph, you lost some good football players, but guys knew what they were doing, and they were able to step in and overcome those losses and still be a really, really good defense. So I expect them to be better, or to be at the very least as good. Now, then the question becomes, okay, they at least were able to maintain what they were. Is there room that they can get better? And I don't mean statistically, because unless you rank number 1 in the country in every category, there's always room to statistically get better. What I'm more referring to is, do they have the ability to get better? Not in theory can they be better, but do they have the resources to be better? Are they talented enough to be better? Do they have the depth to be better? Does the coaching know how to kind of push the buttons to get them better? That part, I think, is accurate. I think they can do that. But what we're going to find out this year is, when will we get to the point that we find out if Notre Dame has the talent to be even better on defense? And that's what we're going to find out. And then the other thing that I kind of have is, this is a really unique makeup of this football team. And this is what I said in the 88 versus 2024 post. By the way, Pat O'Doherty, we'll do score predictions next Thursday. Thursday is the day that we do predictions for games. And we'll have a whole show about it. It's going to be a lot of fun. But when you look at this defense and you compare it to 88, one of the things I loved about that 88 team is you had these really good veteran players. Wes Pritchett was a veteran. Frank Stamms was a veteran. Pat Terrell was a veteran. I think he was a junior, right? Stance Magala, I think, was a junior. You had Jeff Alm, I believe, was a veteran player. They had a lot of veteran players in that team. Ned Bolkar was an All-American the year before. He was another veteran. But you also had this mix of some really talented younger players. George Williams was a younger guy. Todd Light was a sophomore. Andre Jones was, I believe, a sophomore, or maybe even a freshman. Arnold Ali was a young player on that team. You had this really nice blend of George Streeter was a veteran player. You had this really nice blend of really good, gritty veterans. Chris Zorich was a redshirt freshman on that team in 1988, I believe. I think he was a member of the 87 class. So you had these really veteran players that were, Frank Stamms was so important in that 1988 team. And Wes Pritchett was so important to that football team in 1988. But then you had these talented players that were, Michael Stonebreaker was a junior in college, but he missed the year before. He was really his first full year as a starter. Redshirt sophomore kind of player. So you had these really high talent, really good Todd Light, future first-round pick, Chris Zorich, future second-round pick, these really talented younger players to mix with those veterans. Well, that's kind of similar to what Notre Dame has right now. This gap that they have between the top and the bottom experience-wise is unlike something I've really ever seen, and a lot of it's because of COVID. if it's not for COVID, Riley Mills and Howard Cross are in the NFL right now. RJ Open's in the NFL right now. They don't have the eligibility to come back. Jack Kaiser's in the NFL right now. Xavier Watts is in the NFL right now. Actually, no, Xavier would have another year left because he redshirted his first year. I believe Jordan Clark would be in the NFL right now. So you're in this huge situation where you've got a sixth-year senior at will linebacker. You've got a sixth-year senior at nose tackle, a fifth-year senior at defensive tackle, a fifth-year senior at defensive at Viper. You have a sixth-year senior at end. You have a fifth-year senior at one safety spot, a fifth-year senior at the other safety spot. And then you have mixed in with those guys up front, a redshirt freshman that they're expecting big things from in Boubacar, a redshirt sophomore they're expecting things in Josh Burnham, a true freshman in Bryce Young they're expecting things from. Armel Mookham's had a great camp. He's a redshirt freshman. Donovan Heinisch is a redshirt sophomore. He's a young guy. Drake Bowen is expected to be starting linebacker as a sophomore, true sophomore. His primary backup and a guy that's going to play a ton and push him all year is Kingston Villalmas, who's an elite true freshman. Jalen Sneed's a redshirt sophomore. Jaden Osbury's a redshirt freshman. And you've got, Adon Schuler's a redshirt freshman. You've got these really Christian Grace, a true sophomore. And then there's like the only like true junior in the whole mix is like Benjamin Morrison. You know what I mean? Like it's a really interesting mix of these really older veteran players. And then there's this big drop off in experience. And then there's all these really talented younger players. It reminds me a lot of the Lou Holtz team. And it makes sense. Not because, it's a great coach and they're going to win it. But it's when you have a coach that's taking over, you're going to have some natural losses from some of the in-the-middle guys that they depart, or maybe they weren't good enough or they didn't buy in. And so you've got those veteran players that are totally bought in, right? Mills, Cross, Watts, Kaiser, guys like that, totally bought in, and they're still here. They didn't transfer. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. They're totally bought in. And then some of the guys in the middle that maybe weren't good enough, either transferred out or you just had complete recruiting misses. And so now that really good recruiting that happened with the new coach and Lou Holtz with Vinny Serrato and those guys, they did some really good recruiting his first couple of years. And then in 88, some of those guys were sophomores. They were really elite freshmen. And that 88 team had two true freshmen that were hugely impactful on that football team on offense, and Rocket Ismail and Derek Brown. Ricky Waters is a true sophomore, mixed in with a lot of Mark Greens and veteran players. And that's where kind of Notre Dame is on defense, where you've got these 5th and 6th-year guys that have been around for a while. They're totally bought in. And then the Marcus Freeman recruits are now coming up as the freshman and sophomore classes, and they provide the really elite level athleticism. And so it's fun to talk about, but my question now is, how do they mesh together? How does that youth and experience mesh together? And how does Al Golden handle that combination of youth in some areas and extreme experience in others? How does that impact what he can call, how they execute his calls? What can he put on their shoulders at certain positions? That's something I'm very curious to see how he does. And I would assume Al Golden has been in this position before, whether it's the NFL, whether it's you've got this 8-year veteran at linebacker and then you go recruit this, draft this rookie in the first or second round, you got to play him. I'm assuming he's been in those shoes. I know he's been in that situation in Miami. I know he's in that situation at times at Temple. And then, of course, I remember back when he had that great linebacker class at Virginia. Kai Parham was a 5-star guy. Ahmad Brooks was a 5-star guy. And he had some really talented young guys, but then a lot of really good older players too that you had to kind of blend them together. How does he do that? That's going to be interesting to see. Very curious to see how that goes. So those are all things that are going to factor into, okay, can this defense take that next step? To answer my own question, and I'm curious what you guys think, I do believe that Notre Dame has the talent on defense to be better this year. I think they're more athletic than they were a year ago. I think they're deeper than they were a year ago. I think that there's obviously more experience in the system and those type of things than they were a year ago. I think the young talent is ready to kind of emerge and show off the speed and length and athleticism that they focus so much on the recruiting trail. But it's going to be, can they put it all together? And that's really when I talk about, why I'm confident in this football team. I believe they have star power. You guys remember the show I did about the importance of star power. I don't need to reiterate that again. You got to have stars if you're going to have an elite defense. Defense is much more than offense. That's one of the things that Brian Kelly said that was most accurate, honest, truthful thing he ever said was, he's like, look, I can generate offense schematically. On defense, you need dudes. And you can have a talented defense that stinks if it's not coached well. but a very well coached defense that lacks talent is not going to be as good. And people say, well, what about Iowa? Iowa had talent. They just didn't have a highly ranked talent. But, Cooper DeJean was talented. Jack Campbell was talented. A lot of those defensive linemen that went to the NFL were talented. They just weren't highly ranked recruits. They're not putting 4.7s out there corner and locking people down. You know what I mean? But you got to have dudes, but then those dudes have to be coached well. And when I look at this team, I think there's the star power. I think there's talent and depth of talent. In when you look at 2015, and I'd like to hear some feedback from you guys on this. I don't know that this Notre Dame team has quite the high level, top of the line talent that the 2015 team had. Meaning, I don't think there's a Jalen Smith on this football team. There's not a Will Fuller on this football team at wide receiver. Maybe there's a CJ Prosise. I think Jeremiah Love could be that. Jadarian Price could be that. There's not a Quentin Nelson on the offensive line. There's not a Ronnie Stanley probably on the offensive line. Maybe Gerby Lambert, but he's not there now. I'm talking about where they were at the time. And so I think the elite high level talent is not quite as good. The problem that team had was after you got past the top 5 guys, but even more so the depth. I mean, your defensive line in 15 had 4 guys that played in the NFL, started in the NFL on your defensive line, but the depth after that, major problem. Guys that shouldn't have been playing at the Power 5 level. This team may not have the individual high-level talent, but I think across the board, you could argue they have more advantages than that team. And when you look at the depth of talent, so they may not have a Jalen Smith, but they've got a Benjamin Morrison, they've got a Riley Mills, they've got a Howard Cross, they've got a Xavier Watts. You know what I mean? Like, so there's that level of talent, but there's no, with all due respect to him, there's no Joe Schmidt on this team. There's no some of the defensive linemen that were playing as backups on that team. You're not relying on those type of players to be good at Notre Dame. You're not relying on Daniel Cage to be a difference maker for you. It's just a different type of situation than what you had back then. You've got more depth of talent. And I think that's something that has me very excited because you need that talent. They're fast. They're long. Those are important things in the modern age. And the other thing, too, is I believe this team has a chance to have an elite defensive line. I think right now, Bryan Smith and I were talking about this before the show. How would you rate the Notre Dame D-line right now? And I'd say they're definitely top 10. Are they top 5? That's more up for debate because the defensive ends aren't as good. So, like, A&M, they're good inside, maybe not elite inside, but pretty good inside, but they're elite on the edge. Ohio State, pretty good inside and out. There are some teams like that. Georgia, good inside and out. Notre Dame's elite inside. How good are they on the outside? Potentially they could be really good, but they got to prove it, right? So at the very least, they're top 10, easy top 10. The question is going to be, okay, can they be top 5? But either way, they're going to be an excellent defensive line. And that's certainly a great place to build a defense around. So that's a reason why I'm confident. And then the other thing, too, is Notre Dame has legit NFL talent in the secondary. Like legit NFL talent. It's not veteran guys that are smart, know what they're doing. There's legit NFL talent back there in the older class and the younger class. I don't know if Xavier Watts is a first-round draft pick or not, but he's an NFL player. I don't know if Rod Hurd's a day 2 NFL draft pick or not, but I know he's an NFL football player. I don't know if Benjamin Morrison's a high top 5 to 10 draft pick or a late first-round draft pick or even a day 2 draft pick, but I know he's an NFL football player. And you just kind of have that all around. And then Christian Gray is an NFL football player. I mean, he can't get there anytime soon, thank goodness, but he's an NFL football player. And there's other guys. I think Jaden Mickey can play in the National Football League. Maybe not as a starter, but certainly as a guy that could be a rotation player, maybe move to safety like Julian Love did. There's a lot of that type of talent in the secondary, and I think that's very important to make a run in today's game. I mean, you look at most of the teams that have won championships over the last 10 years, they had a lot of NFL football players in their secondary. Even teams that weren't necessarily great on defense had really good guys in the secondary. And to win in today's era, you've got to be able to line up and cover. You just do. And I think they have that. So those are all reasons why I'm really confident in this football team. Some concerns that I have. And number one is, obviously youth. Can the young guys pick up the defense and limit some of the mistakes? You don't want Drake Bowen and Kingsley Asa and Jalen Sneed and Jaden Alsbury and some of those young guys with consistently making bad run fits and not being in the right place at the right time, or not having the right timing, all that type of stuff. You don't want your young corners blowing assignments and giving up big plays. That's all obviously all part of it. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but anyone being honest can look at a team that's going to have this many first and second year players in the rotation and say, hey, okay, I think they're going to be okay. And I asked Marcus Freeman about this, and he's like, I'm not worried about those guys. I'm worried about the transfers who are in their first year in the system. Okay, even more so. Like, those are the things. Can they pick up can the newcomers to the starting lineup and the newcomers to the defense pick up the system fast enough to really be impactful when they get into some of those bigger moments in the opener, number one. But I'm not as worried about that in the opener, because I think Texas A&M is going to have the same problem in game one. So that's not really an excuse, but more so, what about game 5 when you play Louisville? What about game, was it 9 when you play Florida State? What about game 12 against USC, who I think is going to be a very good football team this year? Those are the questions that I have in those moments. Can they limit the mistakes enough? Can they pick up the defense enough to play to their full potential? Can they stay healthy in the secondary? That's a big thing for me. I mean, look, they need Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts to be healthy. It's a must. I don't think this football team can be as good as they need to be if they lose one of those two guys. It's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough. So they got to stay healthy in the secondary. And then the final piece for me is, did I get the evaluations right? Did Notre Dame get the evaluations right? I mean, that's really the thing that you have to, if you're being honest with yourself, you have to ask yourself, because am I right about Drake Bowen? Am I right about Kingston Viliama-Asa? And when I say I mean also Notre Dame staff. Am I right about Josh Burnham? Is he really as good as I think he can be? Am I right about Boubacar Traore? Am I right about Christian Gray? Am I right about Adon Schuler in my Jaden Alsbury? I ranked these guys high. Notre Dame thought very highly of these guys. Yeah, they're playing well against their own team, but that doesn't mean we know that they're going to be good when they play other teams. And that's really what it boils down to when you're looking at yourself when you have a lot of younger players is, yeah, I think that guy is good, but I really need to see it. And so when I talk about, potentially stumbling blocks, what if I get it wrong? What if I got it wrong? What if Notre Dame got it wrong? What if Drake Bowen and Kingston and Jaden Alsbury aren't the talents that we thought they were? What if Armel Mukum's not that, and Boubacar and Josh Burnham aren't the talents that I thought they were? What if Jason Onye doesn't have the talent that I think he has? What if Donovan Heinisch isn't as talented as his brother, which I think that he is? What if Adon Schuler isn't athletic enough to hold up against the best receivers and best offenses in the country? What if I got those wrong? And so you always kind of have that in the back of your mind when you're talking about guys you haven't really seen a lot of. Like I had that thought about Benjamin Morrison. Like, what if I got this wrong before he played at Notre Dame? You hear good things. And you're like, yeah, but if I got it wrong, then they're going to maybe be in a little bit of trouble at corner. And then fortunately you find out in the open. I mean, it took one game to realize, yep, got that one right. With Benjamin Morrison, when you're watching him lock down Ohio State's receivers as a true freshman, you're like, yep, okay, got that one right. Yep, he's really good. When do we find that out? When does that get confirmed? Or when does the concerns have some legs? And that's the thing I do like about the A&M game, because for those that in that regard, just not from an assignment correctness standpoint, not from a did they do their job, things like that, but from the standpoint of when I watched the Texas A&M game and I watched Drake Bowen run around against an SEC team, and I watched Kingston run around against an SEC team, and I watched Christian Gray run with their receivers, and I watch Armo Mulcom and Boubacar going against their offensive lineman, and Josh Burnham going up against their offensive lineman, and Adon Schuler coming down in the alley trying to tackle in space. When you see that, if you say, okay, they belong, or you say, he did not look as athletic against that team as I thought he was going to. The assignment correctness stuff, not worried about that. Like if Drake Bowen crashes the A gap and just blows up the guard, but he was supposed to be in the B gap and the running back runs for 30 yards. That does, I mean, it from a coaching standpoint, it bothers me from this. You got to correct it, but I can correct that. I can fix that as a coach. And if I can do it, I know Al Colton can do it, right? Max Bullock can do it. It's more of but if this guy's not athletic enough, or this guy's taking on guards and getting blasted because he's just not strong enough or good enough or athletic enough, this guy can't run with those guys. That's when you start getting concerned. And honestly, I don't know how you guys are, but I always kind of have that in the back of my mind when we're talking about guys you haven't really seen on that stage. What if I got it wrong? And so we're going to find that that's the one nice thing of all the concerns that you have. That's the one thing that we're going to get answered in game one, because it's not about technique and assignment correctness. It's can you run athletically? Do you belong on that field, on that stage? Do you have what I think you have athletically? And that's what we're going to find out here very, 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 very soon. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of that. Very, very much looking forward to seeing all of that and seeing what this team is capable of. And so as we wrap up, here's kind of what it comes down to for me. I had some fun a couple weeks ago. We did our predictions for the season. I went 11-1. My answer is still the same. I'm an 11-1. I do not have anyone in college football going undefeated this year at the Power 4 level. That's not going to change. Does Notre Dame have the ability to go 12-0? Sure, they do, but it's hard to predict that, and they're capable of that. But this prediction was based off what I think they're going to do, not necessarily what they can do. Of course, they can go undefeated, but there's just things we have to learn about this football team. And as I said, the schedule I do think is challenging enough that I could see them, maybe stubbing their toe at some point in time. My expectation for them in regard to the postseason is still the same. If you're a 5 or a 6 seed, you got to win 2. If you're a 7 or later seed, you got to at least win 1 and be competitive in the quarters. That's the minimum expectation for this football team for me this season. And I talked about why I think they can achieve that and what are the things that could potentially keep from doing that. But my prediction is the same, is they need to get to the playoff and win at least 1. And if they're a 5 or a 6 seed, then they need to win 2, because you need to beat the ACC or the Big 12 champ. If you're a 5 or a 6 seed, you're most likely going to play one of those 2 teams. And if you got to beat those teams, that's the expectation. I can understand if Georgia's still just a little bit better than you, or another team's just a little bit better than you right now that's in the Big 10 of the SEC. I get that. But the ACC team shouldn't be, and the Big 12 team shouldn't be. What they do beyond that, it's going to come down to matchups. I don't know who those teams are going to be, but I do think this team, if things go right, this team has a chance to make a very deep run. They just have to avoid some of the pitfalls that I talked about in this show, which, injuries at key spots, maybe guys aren't as good as you hoped for, the O-line on offense, different things like that. So I'm excited about what this team is going to be. Very, very excited about what this team is going to be. So I hope you guys enjoyed that show. I'm going to be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock for a mailbag. So very much looking forward to that. And then, of course, next week we will kick off our coverage. I will announce what our coverage schedule is going to look like. I'm still putting some finishing touches on that tomorrow before the mailbag starts. So you guys will have an idea of what to expect and who to expect when we get into our in-season coverage for Irish Breakdown on our podcast, and then, of course, on our YouTube channel. So you're definitely going to check that out as well. So I'm getting out of here, folks. Do me a favor, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you've not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com, folks. I promise you're not going to regret joining that board. It's a lot of fun, a lot of good football talk. Even the negative people are still presenting arguments for it. You can go back and forth and have some fun. And I think you guys will enjoy it. And, of course, once the season starts, you're going to get some really good breakdowns, some really good intel. I'm going to have a recruiting intel piece coming up here. Once I'm done, I'm going to go put a little recruiting intel piece on the 2026 DB that you're definitely want to check out as well. So you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can find our normal site at irishbreakdown.com. That's where all of our free content goes. And, of course, subscribe to our podcast platform, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Google, however you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to our podcast platform. And as always, you can find us here on the Irish Breakdown podcast on YouTube. So definitely check that out as well. So you all have a great rest of your day. I'll see you tomorrow. Ivy Nation Sports Talk tonight at 5. Folks, we are 9 days away from Notre Dame kicking off the season and just 2 days away from college football coming back. I hope y'all are excited as I am. Be excited about this team, folks. There's good reason to be. Don't talk yourself into being negative and feeling bad. This is going to be a fun year. I really believe it. How fun? We'll find out. But this is going to be a fun football team to watch. And I know for one, I'm looking forward to watching it. So join me again soon here, folks, and have a great rest of your day on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.